Hello and welcome to another Tuesday Talk with Ruby Reese. My name is Killian, and not only am I the host of this podcast, but I'm also co-founder at Ruby Reese and at dognutrition.ie. Now, I know you're all here for the Greyhound chats and not to listen to my intro, so I'm just going to say very quickly, please follow, subscribe and like us wherever you can. If you're listening to us on a streaming service, please subscribe to our channel there, and also over on Instagram, you can find Ruby Reese and dognutrition.ie profiles. We really appreciate it. We put a lot of effort into this podcast to get you amazing information from the dog community for the dog community. So please just give us a couple of likes. It's for free. Now, without further ado, we're going to move on to talking about retired greyhounds as pets, ex-racers, and you're all here for the Greyhound and Sighthound chats. So I'm going to, without further ado, introduce Niamh from Polite Paws Dog Training. Niamh, welcome back to the podcast. You're very welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me back. It's great to talk to you again.
Would you do us the pleasure of introducing yourself for anyone that might not know you yet?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Niamh. I run Polite Paws Ireland. It's a dog training and walking company based in North County Dublin, but I cover kind of the Dublin area and some surrounding counties and then parts of the Midlands as well. And I help people with their dogs every day. I am the proud servant of a 13-year-old ex-racing greyhound and a little 8-year-old lurcher. They are my life. And so yeah, that's where I'm coming from. I'm coming from Dublin with a sleepy greyhound right behind me.
Very good. I'm delighted that you, in your introduction, you already got in the Sighthounds, because we decided to pick a really cool topic and one that I love talking about. We decided to jump into the specific area of Sighthounds that is retired greyhounds as pets. So maybe let's just start off and talk about, what is something that people usually get wrong about greyhounds as pets?
So there's a few little things that I've experienced and then heard online throughout my entire experience of first having one and then working with greyhounds and sighthounds across the board over the last 10 years of my career. And one of the things that's often purported online is this thing of they're the 45-mile-per-hour couch potato.
Mhm.
And whilst, yes, they do tend to sleep quite a lot and rest quite a lot, um, I think it would be doing them a disservice if we also didn't appreciate that they are very clever dogs and need more than the bare minimum. I think
Mhm.
it's really important that when we share our life with a greyhound, that we don't forget that just because they outwardly might not be causing a nuisance if their needs aren't met, that they deserve to have an enriched life and they deserve to do more than just have the expectation of sleeping all the time, that we do give them some challenges and give them like enrichment bespoke to them as an individual and meeting their needs, because I think they're very good at being quite inhibited and polite and sweet, but actually there's so much dog and there's an awful lot that we could provide them if we give them the chance.
And I love that introduction because I suppose people have, or us as a community, we've nearly fallen into a trap of, first of all, everyone thought, oh, greyhound, they're really fast and they're really energetic. And then people that are better informed said, no, loads of them are real couch potatoes. So we've nearly gone the whole other way to the other end of the spectrum, right?
Yeah, the pendulum has really swung the other way. And I'm
Yeah.
just waiting for it to settle back in the middle again, where we appreciate them for the athlete and the intense dog that they can be, but also they are super duper to cuddle on the couch with. Let's be
Yeah.
real.
Okay, so you kind of get both and not
Yeah,
quite a lot of the time. And I think it's important as well to point out, like, every dog is an individual, but I think, like, even when it comes to greyhound personalities, they're all wildly different to each other. Like, they're full of personality, right? I mean, as a breed.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And like I've met so many characters in my career as well. You know, like Ivy here is really polite, and even from day dot, she hasn't really been a food stealer. Now that's changed, and I'll explain why that's changed over time. But then I'll meet other dogs where someone is like struggling with newly adopted Greyhound who is absolutely into everything and taking stuff off counters, trying to open doors, and I'm like, wow, it's they're all so different, and they're all so like their personalities are just so wide ranging. I suppose we see that in every breed, but like I think people would be surprised. They see these quiet, unassuming dogs, and then you realize that some of them are absolute class clowns. Like they're just, every dog is so different.
Yeah, and it's great to see it because, like you say, you see like a real personality shining through in the different characters then. So it's really, really nice. And now that I've said that they're all individuals, let's try to go back to stereotyping. Um what what kind of personalities could we expect maybe from greyhounds in general? What do you see quite a lot in greyhounds?
So because we're speaking specifically of like ex-racers,
Hmm.
they've come from a history of where they've been bred to chase something
Yeah.
and race. And so they often come into their homes with the experiences of what it was like to live in a kennel and what it was like to live in a racing industry. But then they come into a home, and we we have dogs then that weren't reared in a home because they didn't need to be.
Yeah.
So they don't have the skills of maybe perhaps understanding what a postman is, or what people are doing passing the window, going on the school run in the morning, or like TVs, radios, all the things, like even sofas. They're kind of like, what is going on here? So sometimes we'll see things in newly adopted greyhounds that maybe some of them will have in common. So like for my own girl, I don't think she'd really seen stairs before. She couldn't do steps when we first got her. And we lived in an apartment block, and the options were elevator or steps. And she was
Hmm.
scared of the elevator, so we had to tackle the steps.
Yeah.
And so, like, things like that, where we might see things that we would expect, oh, sure, we didn't even think about the stairs because the dog's just going to come and live with us, and I'm sure she's seen stairs. But actually, there's a lot of normal everyday things that they'll never have experienced before in their life. So we're often their teacher. We have to show them and help them develop the skills when they start looking at stuff that's brand new, and to make sure that we have the patience to do that, because when they come into our home, sometimes greyhounds can be a little bit more inhibited than other dogs. And what I mean by that is they kind of just go quiet and silent, and quite still when they're a little bit like worried or confused or something's stressing them
Hmm.
out, rather than a dog who might be more outward in their discomfort, who might be jumping and leaping all over guests when they're uncomfortable with them, versus, the greyhound who might just stoically go and hide in the corner.
Hmm.
So we need to make sure that while they might not be outwardly showing us lots of concern, we need to treat them as if they're needing help settling,
Hmm.
because they aren't going to show us themselves. Not always. Some of them will. Some dogs will be very very demonstrative of their surprise or concern about stuff, but some will often be quite inhibited.
Yeah. And like, I suppose I like to think about this as well when an ex-racer is coming into a home, it's like you or I nearly being dropped on a desert island. You'd have
Yeah.
to learn so many things that are, I suppose, for humanity relatively normal. Like, in some parts of the world, like, I don't know, climbing trees for coconuts and using a machete and whatever, my little fantasy island here.
Yeah.
But to some people that's going to be completely normal. For me, living in a, suburbia, that's not really things that I do on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to have to learn that. And it's going to be the same for these dogs, right? They're going to have to learn all
Yeah.
these new skills. And some people talk about kind of like almost a second puppyhood when they're speaking about ex racers coming into a home. Do you think that's a fair comparison?
Um, I suppose, yeah, we might see behaviors that look quite puppyish. We
Hmm.
might start to see them, like, as they settle in, they might start to get comfortable enough to play with their toys, and they might start to do things like lie on the couch with their legs in the air, like the roaching.
Yeah.
So yeah, we might absolutely see stuff like that. And then sometimes you'll see like conflicted behavior can look like play. It can kind of like they might bounce and get down on that like played out style kind of position, and then bounce around things that kind of concern them or might freak them out a little bit. Um, and so yeah, we might see behaviors that definitely look puppyish. And so I would say, we probably need to make sure that we're teaching them all the skills they need alongside having fun with them, and giving them opportunities to play and drag their teddies into the garden and do all those things as well, because that's important if they get the chance to do that.
Yeah, yeah. And I suppose with lots of different rescues, you're going to have this kind of, let's say, adjustment period when
Yeah.
they're coming into a whole new setting. But how are ex-racers different from other rescue dogs, if at all?
So they are and they aren't.
Mm.
I suppose they're built very differently. They are the fastest breed of dog, and they are, you know, we've bred them quite intensively for chasing. They were originally a hunting dog, and now we've kind of very heavily bred them for chasing behaviors and to chase down the rabbit. So, they're going to be quick to to find things to predate on, that they might see the neighborhood cat or a squirrel and things like that. So we need to make sure that we can manage that. And at the same time, they're not very different. Like, I mean, if you get any rescue dog who's had an experience of living in more rural areas and then drop them into a city, like you said, they're going to be like, what is this? So the same considerations need to be taken when bringing a greyhound into our home as any dog that's come from that background. When you rear a dog in a situation that looks very different to where they're going to live, there's tons of skills that they're going to need. And so that's the same kind of, that's going to be very much stuff that we're going to need to support them with, whether they're a greyhound or a random Labrador from West Cork.
Mhm. Yeah. Do we see them maybe getting on well with other pets, or can it be kind of down to the individual then as well?
um, so, we've selected for a chasing behavior
Mhm.
in breeding greyhounds. And because we don't really have any interest in the stuff before the chasing or after the chasing in terms of the predatory sequence, and we haven't really selected for or against it.
Mm.
So some of them will be more interested in chasing things than others, and some of them will be more interested in following through with catching and dissecting and doing all those fun things to their prey. So we have to be really, really careful when assessing whether or not a greyhound can live with other pets. And like other pets like cats and stuff, there could be a bit of an issue there, more so than other dogs because we've really heavily selected for it. Now, of course, there's always individuals that will book that trend, right?
Mhm.
There's always going to be greyhounds that can live with cats. But I would say it's slimmer chances than, other breeds or even younger dogs. You want to be getting dogs quite young, under the first year of life, within the first year of life, if you're wanting to for them to live with cats and have some level of success. And most ex-racers come into the home between the age of 2 and 5. That's the
Mhm.
average. And so we're into adulthood, we're into proper adulthood with a few years of rehearsal of chase behind them. So we need to be really, really careful when we're introducing or considering bringing a greyhound into a home where other there's cats or other like mammal type like rabbits or anything like that, and even like considering that with some smaller breeds of dog, just because again their puppyhood they might not we don't know they might not have seen like Bijons and Cockapoos and Labrador, all the other breeds. They might have only seen dogs that look like them, so they
Mhm.
may not respond socially towards it. We have to make sure that we're being quite careful in our observations of this new dog before we consider whether or not that dog can be safely placed into a home where there is other pets. But absolutely, it's not impossible. There are dogs out there that can do that. And, I have a greyhound who, with careful management, was able to be around my mum's like 2 kilogram mini Yorkie for many years. Like it was totally fine, and they got on, and it was just really well managed. So there was no rehearsal of chasing behaviors, like in that home when he was around, the little Yorkie, just because you don't want any accidents to happen, and it was really well managed. So yeah, certain considerations need to be taken, like all
Yeah.
dogs, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I suppose some greyhounds may not have, they might have left the racing industry in the first place because they weren't very good at chasing. So
Exactly.
that could be a situation where, this it may be an indicator that they might be a bit better at living with
Yeah.
chaseable other pets. Let's say.
Yeah, and like
Uh,
some of them may have been reared around cats. Many
mhm.
of them are reared in rural areas, so there could be a chance that your greyhound has seen cats from a young age or other animals from a young age. There could have been
Yeah.
other breeds hanging around. We don't know the specific individual circumstances, so we just go with what the dog tells us versus with their behavior.
Exactly. And I suppose if you're adopting from, an experienced foster home that has smaller pets, they might also be able to give you a good indication
Yeah.
of that as well. So, yeah. And then talking about training with an X-racing greyhound, are there any specific unique challenges there?
I suppose there can be. So I think we need to take it really, really slow when we first bring them home. So you have to
Mm,
imagine they may not have seen, like, even walked on streets before. It may have been quite rural where they weren't really on lead very much. And generally, I find that they all tend to really enjoy wearing their muzzle, and they tend to be generally pretty good on lead. They've had some level of training with that. But again, we're now changing the picture for them. We're asking them to walk on lead in like urban areas and all of that. And so taking it nice and slow to give them the chance to settle in. And then, you know, I find that they're just as responsive to teaching them skills as any other breed of dog. We just need to go by what they are telling us and make sure that we're adjusting the training plan to a level where it's appropriate for our dog, that we're not confusing them or frustrating them. We're making it an appropriate challenge, but we're also making it really understandable for them. So we're taking it nice and slow. You might introduce something like teaching them to sniff on cue. I use go find it a lot. So we might just teach them to sniff on cue, where you just say, go find it, and then toss a few treats onto the floor and get them doing that a little bit before we start asking them to do something a bit trickier. Um, but like there's certain things that I find that they have a harder time doing. So for example, certain positions like sit, I find that sit is just one of those behaviors that some greyhounds can do it and others tend to have a harder time just because of their anatomy.
yeah.
So um it might be better if you're going to teach them, if you want them to sit and wait, for example, that you're teaching them maybe to lie down and wait, so that you're adjusting it again. You're looking at what they can do and you're seeing, is that something that's teachable or are you struggling with it? And then we adjust accordingly. But they're super responsive, super into it once they get going. Like Ivy knows tons of tricks, like really, really trainable.
Yeah, okay. So they want to learn, and I think you can kind of see that in a
Yeah.
lot of their little personalities as well. That they really are curious and kind of want to learn. And it's so interesting that you said that they don't love sitting down, because actually thinking about it, I've seen most breeds sitting down, but similarly to Frenchies, you rarely see a greyhound sitting down. You sometimes see them lying, but not really sitting. So
Yeah.
it's interesting.
But it must be hard then as well if you've got very little fat coverage. It's like you're sitting on bone. Like it must be so
Yeah.
uncomfortable trying to bend those long legs into that position. It's like it's so awkward looking.
And you're right. Actually, we were talking about the roaching earlier, where they're lying with their legs stretched out, like they don't even lie
Yeah,
down with them kind of bent or kind
yeah.
of curled up. So yeah, okay, it must be an anatomical thing. Um, and are there you mentioned kind of that they're often quite good at walking on the lead, if in the right circumstances, at least good at wearing muzzles. um do X-racers have any other specific behaviors or habits that they might have picked up that are beneficial to us, like those that we mentioned, or that might potentially need to be unlearned?
Um, so I suppose there's probably a few things in terms of their predatory behavior
Mm,
that we would need to just be careful with because, and not that they can unlearn it, but because we haven't really selected for other stuff either side of the chasing, when it comes to racing, they often don't give a whole heap of behavior before the chasing. So, with like collies and stuff, they stalk and they give the eye and they might lower the head and do that creeping thing. You might see stuff like that before they set off to chase whatever it is. greyhounds can often look quite still and almost interpreted as calm before they just take off and chase things. So that can make it really, they can make it harder for us as their guardians to identify that, especially in the earlier days. And then we also have to be aware that, like, it is so challenging for a dog to move from one place to another. When they're moving from their original home or their foster into your home, that is so challenging. And when dogs find things challenging, sometimes we'll see an increase in the behaviors that they're bred to do because they're the things that's the behavior that's predictable for them. That's the behavior that they know. And so they may respond to challenging situations with more rehearsal of that thing. And so we need to be very, very careful that we keep their world initially quite small, that we're not going getting our dog home on a Friday night and then going bringing them to St. Anne's Market on the Saturday morning. You know that they're
Yeah.
going to see all these things and squirrels and have their minds blown. Um, and we want to make sure that we're keeping their world quite small so that we're giving them a chance to settle in and not rehearse tons of stuff inappropriately. But yeah, there's that that sort of angle of it. I'd be kind of watching. Um, and then other things that I've noticed, I wasn't, and now I'm still trying to figure out if it's whether it's the stress of moving or what is it. But certainly in those first few days of having Ivy home, first few weeks, she was an early riser and she'd be up at 5:30, like ready for breakfast. And I was looking at
Mhm.
her like, "Are you serious? It's 5:30 in the morning." But I, I don't know whether it was because her kennels had gotten her up that early or whether it was the struggle of moving in with us
Mhm.
and just trying to adjust. But that was certainly a wake up call in all senses of the word. It's like, oh God. But yeah, no, she now sleeps in way past 11 most mornings. She's
Very
flipped
good.
it completely. Yeah.
Was that at least in the summertime, or were you getting up at 5:30 when it was still dark for another 5 hours?
No. So we got her in May in
Okay.
2015. So by the end of the summer, she was sleeping in. It was grand.
Very good, very good. At least you had a little bit of brightness coming
Yeah, it was grand.
when yeah, exactly. And I suppose you mentioned the first days then. So should people be expecting to keep things very mellow the first couple of days? Like you mentioned, not to be planning kind of big outings and a full social calendar kind of from day one. How slow
Yeah.
should people be kind of planning for?
So suppose this is for like any new dog,
Yeah.
really. When you bring them home, their world has just been turned upside down. Everything they've known is gone. And suddenly you're this brand new person that they don't know. You essentially kidnapped them and brought them
Yeah.
into your house. And um, so we want to make sure that that is so challenging in and of itself that we want to make sure that there's no extra challenges just for a while, right? So for the first few weeks, we're going to treat them like baby puppies. We're going to rehouse train. Even if they're clean in their wherever they've been before, we're just going to make sure. We're just going to make sure we're bringing them out to the toilet so they know where to go and all of that. I want to make sure that we're reducing how many guests are coming over just so that they're not having to deal with figuring out how to respond when people, strangers that don't live there, are coming in and out. We want to make sure that they're not really going for walks so that they don't have to also deal with the challenge of this unpredictable world outside of your home because their world is already unpredictable enough as it is that adding that to them is going to be just too much, overwhelming. So I would say a few weeks of keeping them nice and calm and everything in within your four walls, everything in your home. Get that sort of figured out, letting them just adjust to that, making sure they know where their beds are and they know where their food is and they know where their toys are and they know it's just predictable. They know you're kind of getting used to your routine and figuring out what's going on before we start to add stuff into their world. Um, that's what I would recommend in the early days. But that's
Yeah.
for any dog, really. I say that for any dog that's coming from rescue. If they're puppy or adults, you're keeping their world quite small.
Yeah. Yeah. Not too much at once, just little kind of
Yeah.
chunks. Yeah. And then would you say that you see like a huge transformation in greyhounds in particular after their adoption, over time?
Yeah, you would, because at first everything's so new, and as they
Mhm.
develop the confidence to do certain things, like even tackling like stairs or discovering the couch for the first time, and playing with toys, getting the confidence to play with toys in the garden, and you do start to see a big difference from day one versus 3 months in, 6 months in, a year in. You definitely start to see a lot more personality, a lot more trying new things, particularly when we add enrichment programs to their world. We're giving them the skills and the confidence and the coping mechanisms to handle the things that this new, brand new pet life is throwing at them. So absolutely, you start to see them blossom when that's all
Mhm.
put in place. You start to see a dog who is getting comfortable with this new way of living. But yeah, it's definitely interesting to write down and remember as much as you can from those early days, because in 6 months' time, it's going to be a different dog in front of you.
Yeah, which is amazing as well. It's nice to see a transformation. And talking about, I suppose, play, and you mentioned the word enrichment,
Yeah,
which we all know is more than just a snuffle mat, even though we love them too.
yeah.
Um, I suppose to talk about all this together, we should really look at how much exercise do they need. Do we need to be giving them opportunities in best case scenario to maybe sprint? And what other kind of, enrichment activities do they really, really enjoy?
Yeah, so I think we need to look at what they are designed to do.
Yeah.
And they're designed to chase things, and it's really important from a welfare perspective that we allow dogs that have particularly years of rehearsal behind them to do things like that, to be able to get the put the pedal down and run as fast as they can.
Mhm.
Um, and I suppose whatever's within our remit to do that, we can't just unclip our greyhound on the front of the house and let them go. So we
Yeah.
have to be very careful about how we're doing that. So taking them to like off leash, like the rentables at the private dog parks, not just your local dog
Yeah.
park, but like rentable dog parks might be useful. Um, and certainly then other things that we need to do that we might not think about. I'll give Ivy as an example. So Ivy would have been quite inhibited when I got her, very kind of reluctant to try things. And so one of the projects that we did is we worked through the 100 days of enrichment project. And we went through each of the activities each day. And she started to do things like she started to get really brave, and she started to bin dive, like go into the bin and try
Mm.
and take things out of the bin. Now my bin is like a saloon swing bin, and she's been brave enough to stick her head into that and take stuff out. And whilst people are probably listening to this going, "Oh my God, your dog's so bold," but it's not. The fact that she was able to go from a dog who was afraid to try things to someone who now can problem solve, she's now able to figure out how her behavior functions for her and how her behavior makes things happen. And
Mhm.
like, like, I could just close the kitchen door. It's fine. Like, management is fine. But I was so proud of her that she could do that, that she can take things out of enclosed spaces where she couldn't have been brave enough to do that before. And she can use her feet to pull things out from under the sofa, or she can now like dissect stuff um without being concerned. Like she would never have picked up like cushions before to rip them open, but like any toys now she will. Like, and there's so much that we need to give them, so many skills like that. We want to see a huge behavioral repertoire in our dogs, because the more behaviors they get to choose from, the more skills they have. If they have like a narrow little repetition of behavior and they can't do much beyond that, we're going to get stuck in this kind of the ethogram's going to be quite small of what they can do. But when you give them opportunities and you show them how to do things, they begin to grow in confidence. And we want confident, resilient dogs. Resilience is going to get them through living with humans in this brand new world. So I think, working through a program like 100 Days Enrichment and adjusting each day to your dog is going to give them skills beyond just teaching them how to pull something out from under the couch or lift open the lid of a box to get something out of it. It's teaching them how their behavior functions, how they can manipulate the world around them in order to make it work for them. And that takes any kind of fear out of those things. Then it teaches them that actually you're brave, you can do it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned a couple of kind of, let's say, genetic and selected behaviors a couple of times here. So I might
Mm.
as well plug a couple of other episodes as well of the podcast, because if people are listening in and wondering what exactly we mean by dissection, about the fact that they were bred to chase and that not a whole lot before and after that in the predatory sequence, we've done a couple of podcast episodes specifically focused on that with both Darina and with Simone. So if you want to check those out, go back and look at the earlier episodes, because that is a whole world of interest
I
there
know, yeah.
that the those that have not listened in yet will be really, really interested in. But
Yeah.
talking about, so their enrichment is really important. I guess when you get a greyhound as well, particularly an ex-racer, you're going to come up against other people's expectations as well. So how do you manage other people's expectations, and how do you kind of maybe deal with how other people react around having an ex-racer?
So it can really vary. People who have experienced being around a greyhound before will lose their life when they see it. They're like, "Oh my gosh, is that a greyhound?" It's like beacons to each other. You see someone else has a greyhound and you both lock eyes. You're like, "You have a greyhound, I have a greyhound. We have greyhounds," and it's just this magic moment of we share the same interests. And then there's other people who would consider them like aggressive, or might think, "Oh, I'll keep my dog away from yours because your dog is inherently vicious." And we know that like the polar extremes of anything isn't good. Every dog is an individual, and you know there's no one breed that's aggressive or one type of dog that's going to do one thing over another. Um, so I suppose we have to act as ambassadors really when we have a dog like that, and make sure that we give our greyhounds skills so that they are going to be responsibly managed in public, but also to really highlight just how wonderful and affectionate they can be, and sweet and endearing and funny. Um, and I just think, I'd love if everyone got to meet a greyhound once in their life so that they could see just how amazing they are. And like you just need to watch them run. Watching them run is like poetry in motion. Like it's just it, incredible. They just are alive when they're running. And I think, once their needs are met and we've given them all those behaviors that they need to cope in life with us, they're just hands down one of the best types of dogs out there.
And we were talking before we started recording, and I have to agree with you. You know, I said that we've met quite a few sighthounds in general over the last couple of years, going to dog events and out in the community, and it's been amazing just to see all the different, lovely personalities coming out of these dogs. And I think it's really, really worthwhile also thanking loads of greyhound and sighthound owners around Ireland that are making the effort to travel to events and travel to urban areas. Like I know in Cork and Dublin you see loads of greyhounds out nowadays at meetups, and dressed up nicely and wearing colourful muzzles, and just taking some of that edge off of maybe some people's perceptions anyway, and giving people, like you say, the opportunity to meet these lovable characters as well.
Mm,
So
yeah.
it's really, really nice to see that, and to see our community kind of embrace more of the greyhounds, particularly the ex racers. And actually, talking about managing expectations as well, I wanted to bring up about vets. I've heard in the past that that greyhounds can have very specific needs when it comes to the veterinary side, and particularly to do with like blood values and things like that. Right? They're quite unique with
Yeah.
their results sometimes, right?
Yeah, I suppose, you know, we're taking on dogs that are, I suppose, no longer part of the racing community. They've retired now and
Hmm.
they've come into our lives. And I suppose there's health conditions and there's all sorts of stuff that we need to be thinking about in the future and with them. But, I think for a long time, I think the vets in UCD were taught using greyhounds. And I think, most of the vets that I've ever experienced with Ivy have been quite savvy. They've been quite knowledgeable. And I think they're taught quite well about greyhounds in university because they're so different.
Hmm.
Because their blood values will be different. I think some of the values in a greyhound would be quite ill in another dog
Exactly.
breed, but actually they get away with it because of their muscle structure and their bodies. Um, so I have never experienced an issue where a vet has not understood what we're looking at because of her breed. Um, it, it may be, I've had vets who may have looked at her and gone, I'm not in, I'm only newly qualified. I'll get my superior in.
Sure.
But it's not
Yeah.
so much a knowledge thing as a confidence thing for some vets. I think they all seem to be fairly clued in on what might be going on with greyhounds.
Yeah, which is amazing to see as well. But and I suppose it wasn't critique that I heard. It was more something to
Yeah,
watch out for. Is something that
yeah.
may be alarming is
Yeah,
their
and that's
blood
something I
results.
was told quite a lot before we got Ivy was you'll need to find a good vet now for her.
Yeah,
Not all of them may get greyhounds. And I think that might have maybe been the case years and years ago when we didn't have
true.
loads of them as pets, like before they became real popular as pets. But now that they're the last 15, 20 years, they're just exploding in how many people want ex-racers in their lives. So vets have also caught up. So now I don't think people need to be as worried as much about finding a good vet for their greyhound. Most vets are pretty savvy now, I found.
Mhm. Okay, yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
that's brilliant to know, and I'm glad I asked the question actually because I kind of fell into the trap that that usual people usually ask. So I'm delighted that I did ask. It's great to hear that they kind of are now really really clued in.
Yeah.
And I suppose with in general now, kind of wrapping up, what would you say to someone that's thinking about adopting an ex racing greyhound? I might feel a little bit unsure about it.
Um, I'd probably say, first of all, make sure that you get chatting to people who live with them um, and have them. So maybe going onto one of those Facebook groups and finding out a little bit more about people's experiences in living with them, very different experiences, and asking them about any kind of challenges they've had, just so we get both views, because everyone's going to be like, my dog is great, but make
Yeah,
sure you get kind of a view of what the challenges may have been. Um, See if you look at your own lifestyle and see if that's something, taking on an ex-racer where, you're going to have to slow everything down at the start, much slower than you may have thought, and do you have the time for that? Are you going to be able to cope with some of the challenges? If you've other dogs in the home, are you prepared to maybe put separation in place from the very beginning? To ensure that the dogs can gradually get to know each other as opposed to just throwing them all in together. Um, but these are the challenges we're going to see with lots and lots of rescue dogs anyway. Like any dog that we bring into our home, we're going to have to be kind of careful. But also, assess the dog that you're looking for quite carefully. Make sure you're asking your rescue lots of questions about like how they are with get like guests. So if you've got people who come over to your house quite regularly, you're going to need a pretty sociable dog. Um, versus someone who might live on their own rurally will go, oh, sure, it doesn't need to be super duper sociable. No one calls here apart from the postman. So you need to kind of ask the rescue to match you with the right dog for your environment. And make sure that you are going to be able to meet their needs and work through some stuff because there's always going to be something, no matter what your expectations are. They'll come home and something's going to throw you for a loop. They're going to do something or have a behavior that you're going to be like, what is that? And so make sure you've got a good behavior team behind you as well, just in case, just in case you need any support with anything. Um, but yeah, be prepared to be absolutely owned by a greyhound. They are going to worm their way into your heart.
Oh.
Yeah.
And I love that advice as well, being a little bit patient with the dog, being a little bit patient with yourself. I think that goes an awful long way. And like you say, building up the team. I think anyone that listens into this podcast will know we have that on repeat, building up your team of professionals that you can lean on, and can make, big struggles into maybe little struggles, or not even struggles at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, so no, it's really, really
Yeah.
nice. And I think kind of going into it with a little bit of thought put into it, and like you said, kind of matching
Yeah.
a dog to the potential lifestyle that you have could be a really,
Yeah.
really good call as well.
Yeah. And just on the vet thing then as well, it's probably good that people know some of the health concerns that may come along with having an ex-racer.
Yeah.
You know, they're run pretty hard in their life. Their careers are intense and full of running. And so they're an athlete, and so they come to live with us then. And some of the things we might see later on are things like arthritis, and that can crop up early on, like
Mhm.
young dogs, 4, 3, 4, 5. So making sure that your vet, you're checking in with your vet and asking, can you check over my dog for any signs of arthritis and things like that. Their feet can be kind of tricky. So they can, develop things like corns, which are like pressure sores on their feet. We might have issues with nails and cutting nails and all those things because their nails can be quite long. Nails are an ongoing issue here at Jeepers. They're just so difficult to cut because feet are so sensitive. Um, Teeth can be bad as well, so you might need to. Thankfully, we have not had super duper issues with teeth here, but um, I know some greyhounds will need to get plenty removed. Um, and then, there's also the dreaded osteosarcoma that can, in the long bone dogs, are slightly more prone to it than other breeds, just because their legs are just so long. So it's just being aware that you're taking that into consideration too, because things like arthritis, we've been treating Ivy for arthritis since she was 5, and she's 13 now. So, that's, 8 years of treatments, and that's been
Mhm.
a bill on every month of
Yeah.
medications and stuff. And she's totally worth it, but like just making sure that you have the financial background there or get them insured, all of that stuff, so that you are covered should any of these things arise, because they're just more a lot of them would seem to have some issues like that going on. So just
Yeah.
making sure we have all the health boxes ticked.
And it's so right, it's something that we often overlook, but kind of looking into to what kind of health conditions dogs to be even looking out for, really, in a particular breed, because I think every breed out there almost has plenty of things that they're susceptible to. But knowing what could be down the line can really help you identify it early and kind of get the right support for it. So yeah, you're so right. Yeah, thank you so much for that as well. Niamh, thanks so much for coming onto the podcast and chatting with me about
No
such a
problem.
lovely topic.
I know, they're
I
great.
I now need to go and foster a greyhound.
I'm sure Ruby would love it.
Ruby would love it. I don't know who would be chasing who, but it'll be an interesting one anyway, tall and small. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it so much, and look
No
forward to seeing
problem.
you very soon.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. And once again, a huge thank you to Niamh for joining us on the podcast this week and sharing such valuable information about greyhounds. If you would like to find out more about Niamh and what she gets up to at Polite Paws or Ruby Reese or dognutrition.ie, you can find all of our websites and our social media handles in the show notes below. Thanks for listening in. We bring out a new podcast episode every single Tuesday, so I look forward to seeing you again next week.